Already started. Good afternoon and welcome to the Judiciary Committee. My name is Justin Wayne, Justinwayne, and I represent Legislative District 13, which is North Omaha, Northeast Douglas County. I serve as the chair of the Judiciary Committee. We'll start off by having committee members and staff do self-introductions, starting with my right, Senator Geist.
Good afternoon. Suzanne Geist, District 25, which is the southeast side of Lincoln and Lancaster County.
Angelina Pios, Committee Clerk.
Hi everyone, I'm Wendy DeBoer. I represent District 10 in Northwest Omaha.
Good afternoon, Rick Holcroft, District 36, West and South Sarpy County.
Teresa Ibod, District 44, Southwest Nebraska, 8 counties.
Also assisting us is our committee page is Logan Burtek from Norfolk, who is a political science and criminology major at UNL, and Isabel Cold from Omaha, who is a political science and pre-law major. This afternoon, we will be hearing 6 bills, and they will be taken up in the order outside of the committee room. You'll see senators come and go. Typically, they are testifying in another bill that they have in a different hearing. On the tables in the side of the room, you'll find a blue testifier sheet. If you are planning on testifying today, please fill out the blue form, hand it to the page before you come up so we can keep accurate records. If you hear testimony or maybe don't want to testify but want to have your presence be known and your position be known, at the same table is a gold sheet. I would encourage you to fill out the gold sheet so we can keep things moving in a timely manner. Also note is the legislature's policy that all letters to the committee letters of record to the committee must be received by the noon prior day of the hearing. Any handouts submitted by the testifiers will be a part of the record as exhibits. If you have handouts, please have 10 copies. If you don't have 10 copies prior to your testimony, please give your copy to the committee page so we can make 10 copies for the committee. Testimony for each bill will begin with the introducer's opening statement. After the opening statement, you will hear from those who support the bill, called proponents, and those in opposition. Then they'll followed by those speaking in a neutral capacity. The introducer of the bill will be given an opportunity to make closing remarks if they wish to do so. When you begin your testimony, please state and spell your name for the record. We will be using the 3-minute light system. When you begin, the light on the table will be green. Yellow means you have 1 minute left. Red, we ask you to wrap up your final thoughts. I would like to remind everyone, including senators, to please turn off or silence your cell phones. And with that, we will start with LB248, Senator Vargas. And while he's coming up, just so people know, I am leaving today early. My wife scheduled the end of the year basketball party for my daughter's team, and I happen to be the coach, so I probably should be there. So I'll leave about 5 o'clock today. It's not that I don't think this is important, but my daughter comes a little first sometimes, and this is one of those times. So thank you, Senator Vargas. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Chairman Wayne and members of the Judiciary Committee. Thank you very much. My name is Tony Vargas, T1Y-VARGAS. I represent District 7 in the communities of downtown and South Omaha in the Nebraska Legislature. For those who have previously served on this committee, you may remember LB248 as LB1020 or LB196 in previous years. Put simply, LB248 will prohibit discrimination based on source of income under the Fair Housing Act. Source of income is defined in this bill to include income from Social Security, child support, foster care subsidies, alimony, veterans benefits, or any other form of federal, state, or local public general assistance or housing assistance. Source of income discrimination is seen primarily with housing choice vouchers, commonly referred to as Section 8. I'll give a brief background on Section 8 just to make sure we're on the same page about what is now and how it works. Section 8 is the federal government's major program for assisting very low-income families, the elderly, and the disabled to afford decent, safe, and sanitary housing in the private market. Decent, safe, and sanitary housing. Participants find their own housing in the private market after receiving a voucher from the local public housing agency. The agency uses the federal funds for the vouchers to pay landlords directly the portion of the rent that the voucher that they received covers on behalf of the participating family. Now, if you're eligible for a voucher, the process is generally as follows. You apply, you go through a background check, then you're interviewed and placed on the wait list. Once you receive a voucher, you have 60 days to find a place to live that accepts Section 8. If you find a place to live, the portion of your rent that is covered by the voucher is paid directly to the landlord, and the tenant is responsible for paying the remainder of the rent on time each month to the landlord. This goes directly to the landlord. A couple of additional notes that I think are important for the context of this bill. First, Section 8 is public assistance, but is different than programs like Medicaid and SNAP. In those programs, if you're eligible, you get the benefits. But for Section 8, there are a limited number of vouchers available, and the number available doesn't even come close to meeting the need. I'm going to give you an example that highlights the need in just the Omaha area. In September 2019, the Omaha Housing Authority opened up its Section 8 voucher list for one day to accept up to 1,000 applicants. They received roughly 10,000 calls. I want to take a moment to acknowledge up front some of the pushback that we will likely receive in this hearing. First, I want to reinforce that even though landlords would no longer be able to hold a no Section 8 policy or not discriminate against Section 8 specifically because those funds are federal funds, they wouldn't be able to discriminate against Section 8 or any of these other forms of income, they can still run their business like it's intended to, which is they can use regular screening mechanisms. For those of you that might be a landlord yourself, you can use regular screening mechanisms. You can include rental and tenant history. You can use background checks. You can use credit history. We're not forcing them to accept any tenant, we're not forcing them to accept any tenant that holds a voucher. We're merely opening up the possibility for families that do hold vouchers and preventing them from being disqualified solely on the fact and the basis that Section 8 income is covering part of the rent. It's the only thing. So that means if somebody's applying for Section 8, they're using the voucher, they can't be turned away because they're using a Section 8 voucher from being eligible. They can be turned away for all the other normal everyday reasons that you might determine that somebody isn't a quality tenant. Second, landlords can still charge their regular rents and security deposits. And another tick in the pro column here is that rent payments from the vouchers are reliable, and voucher holders have an incentive to maintain their unit and pay rent on time. The incentive being on a wait list is that being on a wait list this long and the threat of the loss of the housing subsidy if they damage the rental unit or don't pay rent on time or are evicted, those are significant threats and are an incentive for people to follow suit with this. The third argument we often hear against banning source of income discrimination is that landlords find the paperwork and the inspection processes of a federal program like Section 8 onerous and not worth their time. Now, I'm not here to say that the programs run perfectly. I'll be the first to say that it is not. But there's changes that need to be happening at the federal level, and there's changes that happen every single year in terms of updates. There's clearly more that needs to be done. But I would submit that the reason for the inspections is to ensure that units are safe for tenants. And I don't think legislators could or should be persuaded that safety measures should be foregone when there are public tax dollars in the welfare of families involved. The fourth argument we always hear is that Section 8 tenants ruin rental properties and landlords are left to come up with the funds to repair these units. LB248 addresses this exact concern by creating the Landlord Guarantee Program, which appropriates $50,000 to provide grants to reimburse landlords for unpaid rent or damages. This is entirely new language that we haven't included in the past. I'd like to acknowledge, however, that a very similar program exists in the city of Omaha, and it is very underutilized, which leads me to believe that this argument may not be founded in reality, but rather in misplaced blame. Nonetheless, we still reacted and put this language in as a reaction to their concerns. We acknowledge some of the concerns from landlords and others. It is critical that we address the reasons for LB 248 and answer the question about what is necessary to prohibit housing discrimination based on source of income. I talked earlier about a few of those reasons: a long process, a wait list, the number of families needing voucher assistance far exceeding the availability. Those are the process reasons, and the much larger systemic and individual reasons that are at play and relevant to the context here. Now, in 2015, HUD published a new rule on affirmatively furthering fair housing that requires housing agencies to, quote unquote, take meaningful actions to address significant disparities in housing needs and in access to opportunity, replacing segregated living patterns with truly integrated and balanced living patterns, transforming racially and ethnically concentrated areas of poverty into areas of opportunity, and fostering and maintaining compliance with civil rights and fair housing laws. To accomplish this, housing authorities must conduct an assessment of fair housing to better understand local and regional fair housing issues, set priorities and goals, increase accountability in their planning processes. HUD's AFFH rule includes the policy of overcoming patterns of segregation and the denial of access to opportunity that are part of this nation's history. This housing assessment, this picture paints a very bleak picture when we're talking about housing. It acknowledges decades long of redlining practices. These were federally supported segregation practices in 1968 with the Fair Housing Act, but many of these things still are in effect. Minority populations are more concentrated in East Omaha, for one example, where over 90%, and west of 72nd, 90% of the residents west of 72nd are white or Caucasian. Source of income discrimination is what we are discussing here and trying to eliminate with LB248. It is identified specifically as a contributing factor of segregation and notably as a barrier to housing for the disabled and differently abled community. The report talks about disparities across the opportunities because of the impact of segregation on housing issues, noting Black, Hispanic, and Native students. We consider all these things work together, and it's led us to where we are right now. Federally sanctioned redlining policies led to segregated communities that still exist today. These disparities are clear. We need to make sure that we're doing everything we can because, in a nutshell, intergenerational poverty is, and the state of Nebraska is perpetuating it by allowing this type of discrimination based on source of income. There's a lot of research out there that shows that this is going to impact long-term earnings, child educational achievement, lifetime earnings, and the likelihood of ending up in our justice system is in housing. But here's the last thing. Some context about source of income, discrimination bans, and the impact they've had across the country. So far, 11 states, including our middle-of-the-country neighbors, Oklahoma and North Dakota, as well as over 50 cities and counties have enacted laws that do what we're trying to do here today. These laws cover about 1 in 3 voucher holders across the country. And a recent report says that these two major outcomes. First, voucher holders in areas with non-discrimination protections like what I'm asking are about twice as likely to succeed in the vouchers to lease a unit. And second, some areas with non-discrimination protections, voucher holders are able to live in lower poverty neighborhoods than before, leading to desegregation and more opportunities. We see this nationally, that source of income non-discrimination laws can address these concerns. Landlords can still use their regular screening history for tenants. They can still charge regular security deposits and rents. They're assured payment for rent every single month. Tenants have more housing options and more success actually using these vouchers. Communities are less segregated, and again, the landlord guarantee program makes sure that we're accessing funds should any unpaid rent or damages be in place. Last thing I'll say is I appreciate this committee. You've heard this argument before. Every year that we do this, more and more states and municipalities enact these types of non-discrimination laws into place. And what it's doing is making sure that programs that currently exist in federal law are working more effectively and getting enacted and making it easier for people to have housing on the books. That's what this is about. Thank you very much. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Senator Vargas. Senator Kay has a question.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Vargas, for bringing this today. When you're talking about the vouchers, is that a percentage for the rent, or do the percentages, can they change, or are they all a constant number?
So there'll be some individuals talking about the different changes in these HUD vouchers. What I can tell you is they're not always covering the full amount. I would say that that's very, very typical. But they are being paid directly to landlords, and depending on whatever the landlords are charging for their rent, that's a factor in it, but they can charge whatever they want. But this program is working across the country. Working doesn't mean it's perfect. It doesn't mean it's entirely bad. The intent is to make the program work better, and what we can do to make it work better so that we don't have to start new housing programs is pass this non-discrimination source of income.
Well, I appreciate that. I was just wondering if it was like 50% of what the rental price was, 40%, or where that landed in, or if it's liquid where it could change from like 30 to 50 depending on the tenant or whatever.
It's much more sustainable than that, but obviously people's income overall for low-income families does change in terms of their portion. But there'll be other people that speak to that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Takei. Other questions from the committee? I don't see any. You're going to stick around for close?
I'm going to try. Yeah.
All right, thank you. We'll have our first proponent testifier, please. First proponent. Welcome.
Hi, good afternoon, Chairperson Moore and members of the Judiciary Committee. I am Alicia Christensen, ALICIACHRISTENSEN, Director of Policy and Advocacy at Together, which provides services and supports to individuals and families experiencing food and housing insecurity. We are a proponent of LB248 because people deserve the same access to safe, affordable housing, no matter what lawful source of income they use to pay rent. Housing policies that comprehensively address housing insecurity and homelessness create economic and social benefits for everyone. Because housing plays such an important role in community well-being, federal programs provide housing assistance to help Nebraskans pay rent for safe homes. How we pay for something shouldn't determine what we can buy. Shoppers paying with cash don't enjoy a wider selection at the grocery store than those paying with a check. But right now, housing assistance programs like Housing Choice Vouchers, commonly known as Section 8, SSDI, and others, can't be used to their full potential. Right now, a tenant using housing assistance is subject to different screening criteria than any other applicant. Together's case managers have firsthand experience with the barriers of this incomplete housing policy. In 2022, case managers assisted with over 700 individual housing searches for participants who rely on housing assistance to afford rent, from those living on the streets, in vehicles, or in emergency shelters, to households facing a crisis that threatens their family's ability to remain in their home. Our current policy approach means that this is a much more difficult procedure than it's much more difficult when a tenant uses housing assistance. These housing searches consume more time, energy, and funds than they would if all households had the same opportunities to rent safe, affordable housing. It's frustrating because we have the tools to help the households find stability and exit homelessness, but we're unable to use them effectively. LB248 will allow households and service organizations to use housing assistance programs to their full potential by giving everyone the chance, an equal chance, to rent a home, regardless of how they pay. Therefore, we urge this committee to advance and support LB248 because it will ensure fairness for all Nebraskans seeking safe and affordable housing. I'm open to any questions if you have any.
Thank you. Are there any questions for this testifier? I don't see any today, but thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Let's have our next proponent testifier, please. Welcome.
Thank you, Chairwoman Moore, and the members of the committee. Can you wait just a second to turn on the light? I got elephants for some of them. Okay. Yeah, please. Thank you. No. I apologize. Okay. Please turn on the light. Hi, my name is Josephine Litwinowitz, LITWINOWICZ, and I support this bill on the heels of what Senator Vargas said. There was a part in there that triggered me because I was homeless once in my wheelchair, and that's an interesting story. But a month and a half probably, and then I was rescued. I had I put a couple slashes in my wrist, a few staples and some stitches, and so I was at the mental ward, and I couldn't even act on my own behalf at the time to try to find something. So I was in the mental ward, and I got a beautiful person from Lutheran Family Services. Okay, so she helped me. She was calling everybody, and the only time, because everything's all booked up, the only places she ended up calling are the ones that didn't have waiting lists. And that's not many. And plus, there's not a lot of places anyway. And so what happened was it took 10 days, but that's just because she was an animal and it was the turn of the month. But if I would have been discriminated against based on my disability income, I'm just saying, because that would have been a huge problem. And I don't know, I think I got my voucher used just before the 60 days. I'm not sure, I think so. But my voucher would have expired. And if some landlord, because I've only been in buildings, with bigger buildings where you don't have that problem, I suppose, typically. And so, if I would have been discriminated against and I had to get a new voucher, even though you can accelerate your, you can actually move up your place in the list if you go through this, budgeting or, education program. But that would have been insane. And I knew other people when I was at the mental ward, because I was there for a while. The couple times I've gone, there's been people there every time waiting, just waiting for, a place to go, and so I've seen that. And so it's kind of personal to me, just like with bill number 3 today. Thank you, everybody. Any questions?
Thank you. Are there any questions for this testifier? I don't see any today. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Senator. I did get the monkeys for some of you. I mean, the elephants.
We'll have our next proponent testifier. Welcome.
Oh, yeah, sorry. How's everyone doing? My name is Tutkailech, Tutkailech. I am here on behalf of NeighborWorks Lincoln in support of LB248. Chair Wayne is not here, but distinguished members of the Judiciary Committee, at NeighborWorks Lincoln, we open doors for people to achieve their dreams of home ownership, as well as those who are committed to strong and inclusive neighborhoods. 36 years of doing this work has shown us that communities are stronger when everyone has safe, affordable housing. Maslow's hierarchy of needs provides additional perspective here. The world-renowned sociologists intentionally place physiological needs such as food, clothing, warmth, and shelter at the foundation of the pyramid. And intuitively, I think we all understand that no great structure, in this case, communities, can be built on a cracked foundation. In the case of today's hearing, those cracks equate to vulnerable residents that remain housing insecure because they rely upon voucher-based housing assistance. The Lincoln Housing Authority distributes about 28,000 vouchers, and there is an 8-month wait to appear on that list. But as I have indicated, simply having a voucher does not ensure a safe, affordable home, because at least 20% of Lincoln's voucher holders are not able to use them due to source of income discrimination by local landlords, a practice which is still legal in Nebraska. This practice further exacerbates the severe shortage of affordable housing in Lincoln, which we understand to exceed 17,000 housing units. So universal acceptance of vouchers would help the Lincoln community solve almost a third of its shortage overnight, since apartments renting for less than $1,000 a month account for 5,000 units. So voucher recipients have educated themselves. They asked for help. They verified their need. They waited nearly a year and have inquired about a dozen apartments or homes within their budget, only to be denied because of their source of income. Our work in the community building program at NeighborWorks causes us to hear many devastating stories of people being denied on the basis of their voucher. This includes people with disabilities, single parents, marginalized members of the racial minority populations. In our experience, less formal households or landlords often misunderstand the voucher approval process and stigmatize recipients as a result. This leads to landlords missing out on the subsidized income that comes with the voucher. According to Shelterforce, voucher recipients are more financially stable than their unsubsidized counterparts, not less. Studies show that when well-kept subsidized properties are located near the other market rate units and developments, They do not cause any loss in property values or increase in crime. Overall, there is little to distinguish properties that rent to voucher holders from those renting to low-income tenants.
Sir, sorry, your
Oh,
red
sorry,
light
I
is
wasn't-
on. That's okay. Let's see if there are
I'll
any
take any
questions.
questions, yeah.
Let's see if there are any questions for you. We have your written testimony, thank you. Are there any questions for this testifier? I don't see any. Thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for being here. We'll have our next proponent. Sorry, I just got to be, we got a full room, we got to stay on the lights today.
Thank you, Chairman.
Welcome.
Thank you. Members of the Judiciary Committee, my name is Casey Ogle, and I'm a senior staff attorney with Nebraska Appleseed for Collective Impact Lincoln. I'm here today on behalf of Collective Impact Lincoln in support of 248, and we support 248, LB248, because it ensures that those who rely on vouchers or other forms of rental assistance are able to use that money to pay rent. Senator DeKay, to answer your question earlier, I did want to answer that vouchers are designed so that a tenant who uses them pays, I don't remember if it's 30 or 33% of their income, and then the voucher covers the rest of the cost. So it's a sliding scale based on the tenant's income.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. Nationally, at least 20% of voucher recipients are unable to use them because so few landlords accept vouchers as a form of payment, and voucher success rates in Lincoln are currently running at about 74%. That is 26% of voucher holders or voucher recipients in Lincoln are unsuccessful in finding housing that will accept their voucher. LB248 helps voucher recipients be able to successfully use their vouchers, and studies show that housing voucher recipients are 12% more likely to be successful in using their voucher, which cuts the voucher failure rate in half. You'll likely hear from those opposed to this bill that it will force them to comply with housing choice voucher inspection requirements, but this is not the case. This bill prohibits landlords from refusing to rent to a tenant because they would use a voucher to help them pay their rent, but it does not require landlords to ensure their units comply with inspection requirements. If a unit fails the inspection required by the Section 8 program, landlords will have the opportunity to fix the problems. If they do not, the housing authority will not authorize the tenant to rent in a substandard unit using a federal subsidy. While it would be in the landlord's interest to ensure that the unit meets basic quality standards, the bill doesn't force compliance. And the inspection required by the Housing Choice Voucher Program ensures that a federally subsidized rental unit meets basic housing quality standards outlined by the federal government. You may hear that these housing quality standards are difficult to navigate and ensure that a unit passes on first inspection, but inspection standards are available for landlords to review. And the most common inspection problem, as reported by the Lincoln Housing Authority, is a problem with a smoke alarm. So these are basic health and safety standards to which every tenant is entitled. And for these reasons, we would urge the committee to advance LB 248.
Thank you. Are there questions for this testifier? I would go over something with you here. So the Housing Choice Voucher Program, so that's the Section 8, requires that there be an inspection. Does that have to, so I'm a landlord, I accept the voucher tenant, and then after I accept them, is that when the inspection would happen? Well,
Yes,
when does the inspection happen?
I believe it's a process where the tenant would apply, the landlord would express interest, and then there'd be some negotiations, not exactly negotiations with the housing authority, because there's a standard contract that the housing authority will use, and also these these inspection points. So there will be an inspection of the unit. As long as everything checks out, then the contract would be signed between the housing authority and the landlord to ensure that the landlord receives payment.
What's the timeline on that? How long does that whole process usually take?
I couldn't
You don't
speak
know.
to that,
Okay.
I'm sorry.
I'll ask someone that. But let's say that they fail the inspection, something is improper. So then what happens next if something doesn't work out and they fail the inspection?
Sorry, Senator.
No.
There is a chance for a reinspection, so there's a chance to fix whatever the issues are and then have a reinspection. I'm not sure if there's a second reinspection allowed or not. I don't remember that off the top of my head.
Okay, so let's say that the landlord fails it, can the landlord just say, okay, I failed it, it was nice, we tried, go on your merry way, we're not gonna make it work? Or does the landlord have to try to fix it?
I think under this bill, it might be, I think that is a bit of a question. Whether they would have to try again, and whether, I think the idea of the bill is that landlords would not be able to discriminate based on this source of income, and if they refuse to come into compliance with the housing standards, there is a point at which the housing authority will say we won't allow a tenant to rent to that unit, and I think there'd be a question of how much sort of back and forth has to happen before the housing authority decides not to pursue a relationship with that landlord.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Next proponent.
Hi, my name is Carolyn Pospisil, Pospisil. I'm with the Housing Foundation for Sarpy County, and more specifically to the conversation today, I'm with Bellevue Housing Authority and housing and our respective programs. I have prepared statements, which I've also submitted via writing, but in the interest of time today and the questions that have been answered so far or asked so far, I'd like to be able to answer those and then and also to answer any questions you have as a representative of the Housing Authority and a former member of other committees for that. I think I can give some answers that apply to the entire state as well as the HUD programs. Our waiting list the question was asked about waiting lists. Our waiting lists are open in Sarpy County every 2 to 3 years. In a 2-hour period, we take as many names as possible. Last time the waiting list was open, we took 1,000 names in 2 hours. We roughly only have 400 vouchers in our system. And 2 to 3 years is what it's going to take to go through those names. Of our persons that we serve, 50% are fixed income, so we're receiving some sort of Social Security or other disability payments. 45% of our families are working families. That does leave about 5% of our persons who are claiming minimal or no income. We do review those claiming minimal income quarterly, and income or rent is then sliding scale based on that. Rent is based on sliding scale, and to address your question, Senator, that is for 30 to 40% of their income. 30% is the base for our fixed income families, and 40% people can go up to if they're working. As far as the question about inspections are done after a unit has been approved as a Section 8 unit. So it would have to have been identified already as someone that wants to rent it. Unfortunately, we don't have the time to do pre-inspections in order to keep things going. We can't answer general questions though before someone rents. The process for us, once someone takes assistance or once a unit is found, it takes about 10 days for us to process everything on our side. The question was also asked about second inspections. We do allow for, HUD in general does allow for second and third inspections if they want to. The question was asked if people can do that inspection and decide they don't want to do the program. Landlords do have that option if they choose. We try and encourage them not to, but they do have that. To take one of the misnomers out of these conversations, 70% of our families are working families that applied for the vouchers, and 30% were fixed income. We don't allow anyone to start a program if they're claiming zero income, so they have to show where money is coming from to pay their regular bills before we allow them to receive assistance.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Senator DeKay.
Thank you. You say you take up to 2,000 or 1,000 calls in 2 hours to fill those vouchers?
We do them online, and then we take as many names as we can take in that time, and then we send them all pre-applications. Go ahead, sorry.
And when those applications get filled, somewhere down the line, 2, 3, 4 months, whatever, down the road, if a unit comes available, is it the next person in line, or how do you fill?
We operate from a waiting list, so someone applies for the voucher. As we get to their name on the waiting list, we do a criminal background check, and then at that point we bring them in for a voucher briefing where we explain all the rules. At that point they receive their voucher, and they use that. It takes us about 2 to 3 years to go through the list that we have. From 1,000 names, we qualified 750 people, and then it takes us about 3 years. Did I answer the question?
Yep,
Okay.
thank you.
Thank you, Senator Kay. Other questions? Okay, so let me ask you mine then, just to be clear about it. So typically, what I remember from this hearing in the past is that there was a complaint that in order to be a Section 8 housing unit for rent, you have to reach what I think I remember in the past has been said is a pretty high standard of good shape, I guess.
There is a minimum housing quality standard that's required to be met, and for the most part, that comes down to something that's safe. There's very few things we've ever rejected for that were anything above what you would have for a standard unit. And as far as safety is concerned, the most common one we see the comment was made was about smoke detectors, and that has been it. The only thing we require as far as smoke detectors is they have to be working, and HUD does require a carbon monoxide, and those are available at Menards or wherever you want to go that are combined units anymore. So.
And you said the process takes about 10 days, so somebody would come in and apply, and then it would take about 10 days?
We issue them their voucher, and at that point they can do the search. The 10 days comes into once they find a unit, and a landlord has screened them and wants to take them as a tenant. It takes about 10 days to go through the inspection process, and then us to get them back out the door.
And at any point, the landlord can say, "This is getting too difficult for me. I want to get out of this because I don't want to fix whatever it is, or it's going to be too hard for me to fix whatever it is you say I have to fix."
Correct.
Okay. All right. Are there Senator Holcroft?
Thank you, Vice Chair DeBoer. Can you tell me what's your chain of command? I mean, who do you work for? How do you get your funding?
Funding comes directly from HUD. We are a pass-through to the landlords. It's our job to administer the program according to HUD's rules and regulations.
And who do you report to?
Myself, I report to a board. Our board is appointed by, and every board in Nebraska is appointed by either the jurisdiction. So it's appointed by the mayor's, by city council, or by county commissioners.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yes.
Thank you, Senator Holcroft. Other questions for this testifier? I do not see any. Thank you so much. Let's have our next proponent.
Good afternoon. My name is Scott Jackson, SCOTTJACKSON. Dear Committee, I work for Heartland Family Service as a permanent supportive housing case manager. I'm writing today in favor of support of LB248 on behalf of our agency and the clients we serve. Through our Housing and Supportive Services program, we serve individuals and families experiencing homelessness. We assist our clients in identifying affordable housing and provide financial assistance to subsidize rental costs with the goal of clients achieving financial independence on their own. Our clients face many barriers, including lack of available and affordable housing, landlords and property owners unwilling to collaborate with clients receiving financial assistance, and clients with criminal history or poor rental history. In certain instances, landlords and property owners simply refuse to work with housing programs altogether. Landlords and property owners also incorporate income guidelines requiring individuals to have 3 times the rent for a monthly income. This is an example of income discrimination our clients face, preventing clients from finding safe and affordable, stable housing. This practice is unfair and perpetuates the stigma of individuals who need housing. LB248 also supports landlords and property owners. LB248 also gives them the opportunity to pursue unpaid rent and damages with the landlord guarantee program. It also allows, the fear of damages and unpaid rent should not prevent current and future landlords from working with housing and financial assistance program. LB248 allows individuals the opportunity to pursue housing without fear of discrimination due to their income. It also provides a chance for individuals to break the cycle of homelessness and allows individuals to meet the basic human right to housing. LB248 will prevent homelessness by allowing individuals to move into housing from the shelter and the streets. LB 248 promotes housing stability for folks coming off the street and to hopefully live independent in the community. By passing the income discrimination bill together, we can close the gap between affordable housing and the number of individuals who need housing. It supports landlords and property owners. We ask that you vote this bill out of committee and pass it on forward. Thank you for your time, and I'll take any questions you may have.
Thank you. Are there any questions for this testifier? I do not see any. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Let's have our next proponent. Welcome.
Howdy, y'all. My name is Andrew Farias, that is ANDREWFARIAS, and I'm the Policy Fellow with the Asian Community and Cultural Center here in Lincoln. Today we are testifying in support of LB 248 to ban source of income discrimination in Nebraska. The Asian Center is a nonprofit organization that supports and empowers all immigrants and refugees through programs and services. For over 30 years, our organization has served the Lincoln area by increasing the stability of immigrant and refugee families who face economic and cultural barriers to self-sufficiency as new Americans. In 2022, we served 1,735 clients who spoke 31 native languages and were from 36 different nationalities, including Vietnamese, Chinese, Karen, Latina, Sudanese, Yazidi, Afghan, Ukrainian, and so many other populations. This includes individuals who are second and third generation immigrants, but also new arrivals who have escaped religious persecution, ethnic cleansing, and war. These are folks who have sought better lives for themselves and their families because they have heard from other community members about how great it is to live in Nebraska. Upon arrival to our state, many immigrants and refugees that we serve receive rental assistance in the form of a housing voucher. This is because some of our clients arrive in the United States with little to no money. They literally have the clothes on their backs and whatever else they could carry in a few suitcases. We have dedicated staff of case managers who support clients in settling into the United States. This includes learning the basics of the English language, securing employment, and supporting their family here in Nebraska, as well as those that they have back in their home country. They do their best to ensure that these new Americans have the resources they need to work towards self-sufficiency. But the barrier of landlords discriminating based on housing vouchers makes it much more challenging to work towards this goal of not relying on assistance. When we have clients who are able to find housing with the voucher, that means there is one less worry for them. They can focus on acclimating to life in the United States and also building a better life for themselves and their family. Everyone deserves quality, safe, and affordable housing that is free from discrimination based off of their source of income in Nebraska. LB 248 will help promote housing stability and ensure that immigrants and refugees feel welcome in our state. Therefore, we urge the committee to advance LB 248 to general file. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there questions for this testifier? I don't see any. Thank you so much for being here. Let's have our next proponent.
Good afternoon. My name is Scout Richters, SCOUTRICHTERS, here on behalf of ACLU of Nebraska in support of LB 248. We want to thank Senator Vargas and the committee for its time today. The overarching goal of the ACLU with respect to housing justice is to end barriers to fair housing and ensure fair housing opportunities for women, with a particular focus on women of color, women with minor children, and survivors of domestic violence, as these groups disproportionately face barriers to fair housing opportunities. Housing justice is a priority area and goal of the ACLU because we know that one's home is central to all aspects of their life. If someone doesn't have housing stability, advocacy for their rights while at school or on the job, for example, don't mean much. LB 248, as you've heard, would provide critical protections against housing discrimination based on a potential tenant's source of income, as well as create the landlord guarantee program. Again, as you've heard, as the law stands now, landlords can deny housing applications simply because the applicant uses income originating from areas such as Social Security, child support payments, or Section 8 vouchers. This legislation would rightfully prohibit this harmful practice and ensure that no tenant is denied housing due to the origin of their rent money. We are already accustomed to anti-discrimination provisions in housing, and this simply adds another protected characteristic to our already existing scheme. So with that, we reiterate our thanks to Senator Vargas for bringing this legislation, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions for this testifier? I will ask you, so I think one of the things in the past that folks have said is that a landlord might get into trouble because they're denying a person for some other reason, but they're worried because they have a voucher that they're going to be said to be doing it for that reason. Is there some legal mechanism for that to sort of be sorted out, or what's?
Yes.
Can you speak to the way in which the legal practice would work on it? Because you're a lawyer, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Can you speak to the legal practice in this area?
Right, so as I said, we already have those protected characteristics in the law, and there would be a whole legal process that someone would go through where proof would be required to show the evidence of that discrimination, and they would have their opportunity to rebut that as well. So there are already built-in protections where a landlord wouldn't be on the hook just because they were accused of this kind of discrimination.
So there'd have to be some sort of evidence that it was about that and not about some other reason?
Correct.
And who has the burden of proof to show that that it was about that?
It would be the person bringing the charge of discrimination.
Okay. Yes. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Are there other questions? I don't see any, thank
Okay,
you.
thank you.
Next proponent.
Good afternoon. My name is Scott Mertz. It's SCOTTMERTZ. I am the director of Legal Aid of Nebraska's Housing Justice Project, and I have over 13 years' experience representing low-income tenants in Nebraska. I want to thank you for providing us with the opportunity to appear today and support LB248, and I want to extend thanks to Senator Vargas for both introducing this bill and inviting Legal Aid of Nebraska to testify today. Legal Aid of Nebraska is the only statewide nonprofit law firm that provides free legal services to low-income Nebraskans and low-income tenants across the state. In my written remarks, I'll have some numbers in here that reflects how dire and serious the need is for support for housing here in Nebraska. In 2022, Legal Aid Nebraska closed 12,701 individual cases, and of those, 2,823 unique cases were related to housing and preservation of housing. So that's over 20% of the work that we do involves somebody at risk over loss of their housing. And we know that only a small fraction of our clients in those cases actually have a Section 8 housing choice voucher, but we also know that the majority of all of our clients are actually eligible for subsidized housing and specifically eligible for the vouchers. 84% of all of our cases involve people living below 125% of the federal poverty line and 31% below 50%. That's deep poverty. And these are individuals who should be accessing the Section 8 Housing Choice or Voucher Program, but are not. The program, the Section 8 Voucher Program, is designed to provide relief to our cost-burdened Nebraskans who are renting from private landlords. It's providing subsidized rent to low-income families. The relief provided by the Section 8 vouchers is frustrated when the burdened tenants face the burden of having to relocate and secure housing in a market where so much of the renters will not accept Section 8 rental vouchers. We can just see this through the public record when people advertise on Craigslist, on Facebook. People are told not to come here and apply because they will not accept a Section 8 housing choice voucher family. This is counter to the entire purpose of this program, which is to keep people in need housed and keep them housing secure. So the money afforded with the Section 8 program is designed to ensure that people who are low income can still provide money to the landlords and keep the landlords solvent and to keep their businesses profitable as well. It's supposed to be a two-way beneficial arrangement between the tenants and the landlords. It is our belief that every Nebraskan deserves quality, affordable housing without the constant dread of an eviction and a loss of housing over them. When a Section 8 recipient in particular is facing eviction, they not only face the burden of having to leave their homes, but to find a home that will take the voucher, of which there are so few, and that's what we're facing day to day.
Thank you. Let's see if there are questions. I'll just ask you sort of what I asked the last testifier, because it sounds like maybe you interact with some of these kinds of lawsuits on a daily basis. So if we pass this bill and someone thinks that they have been discriminated against based on source of income, what would a lawsuit look like in that case? They would bring the lawsuit, and then if the landlord had said, no, it's because I don't think you're going to be able to pay the remainder of the cost that is assigned to you under the voucher or under the rent, how would that go then at that point?
As was discussed previously, there's a burden on the person bringing the suit to prove up their claim, but this already exists as we have a number of protected classes in both state and federal law, so that individuals could bring cases because they perceive that they have been denied housing due to their gender, their religion, their race, their family status. Variety of classes exist right now that are protected. It has not resulted in some deluge or flood of frivolous or unnecessary lawsuits right now. That you still have to have merit. There still has to be facts that are proved up in any discrimination case.
So there hasn't been whenever one of these protective classes is passed, have there been a deluge of lawsuits?
I would have to say we're not certainly bringing them legally in Nebraska, certainly, and I don't believe that the state is in turn flooded with a lot of discrimination claims, certainly not to any extent that's unmanageable or proof that these are meritless cases.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? I don't see any, thank you.
Thank you.
Next proponent. Welcome.
Thanks for having me. Welcome to Landlord Tenant Day. Vice Chair DeBoer, members of the Judiciary Committee, my name is Erin Feichtinger, ErinFeichtinger, and I'm the Policy Director for the Women's Fund of Omaha. As I said, welcome to Landlord Tenant Day. As some members of this committee know, this is the third iteration of this specific bill, and I've heard it said by past committee members about this specific day in Judiciary Committee, didn't we fix all this yet? And the answer to that is no. Much like property taxes, school funding, criminal justice reform, we talk about them time and time again in front of this committee, in front of other committees, because they are important enough. Everyone knows there's an affordable housing crisis in this state. You could walk over to Appropriations Committee and hear more about it. It's easier to focus, I think, on the bricks and mortar aspect of that affordable housing crisis because that solution seems simple. I mean, it's not simple. We know it's not simple, but it certainly seems that way. We just build more housing. But there are two parts to the affordable housing crisis: the housing itself and the people who live in it. And it's that second part that we're addressing here today. Opponents to this bill and to all the other bills, they'll say that there are unintended consequences of these bills, that this will raise the cost of housing, which the landlords will in turn be forced to pass on to tenants, which will start us down the slippery slope of collapsing the affordable rental market in Nebraska entirely. Increasing the safety and accessibility of housing will not collapse the rental market. Increasing the stability of families and communities will not collapse the rental market. They'll talk about unintended consequences. I want to talk about the intended consequences of allowing for source of income discrimination. Women had 75% of households served by HUD rental assistance programs. For those 75% of female-led households attempting to use the vouchers in the free market, source of income discrimination means they could and often do lose the voucher by not being able to use it. It's worth noting that housing assistance also helps to reduce domestic violence, provides critical support for survivors, And opponents to this bill in all of its past iterations have testified that the paperwork is too onerous or the habitability requirements too bothersome, and that people who are receiving housing assistance are just not good tenants because they are poor and they have nothing to lose. We would argue that the benefits accrued to society from the housing stability resulting from choices in the free market and the safety of housing far outweigh a problem with paperwork. We would argue that far from being bad tenants with nothing to lose, voucher recipients have worked harder than most to provide for their families' long-term housing stability. Passing LB 248 will not ruin landlords and the affordable housing market. It will give Nebraska families a better chance of success. We would once again urge this committee's support of this bill, and please do not hesitate to ask me any questions, and I will answer them to the best of my ability.
Are there questions from the committee? Senator McKinney.
Thank you, Senator DeBoer, and thank you, Ms. Feistinger. I remember being a kid, and we were on Section 8, and I remember there were times where my mom would be calling around trying to find a place to rent, and I remember those phone conversations, and she would have them on speaker a lot of times, and the responses she would get from landlords was super offensive a lot of times. And do you view housing discrimination by source of income as a form of redlining? Because it's not just based on race, it's kind of redlining based on your socioeconomic position.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I know that Senator Vargas mentioned in his opening that source of income discrimination has been identified as one of the ways that we can overcome this decades of housing discrimination in this country, and that's true. We know that the idea behind something like a housing choice voucher is to allow tenants the ability to participate in the free market, to move to neighborhoods of better opportunity, whether that's economic or have better schools. And we also know that the majority of public housing assistance right now is being used in exactly the way that it's not intended, which is to say continuing to be segregated into what HUD would define as racially and ethnically concentrated areas of poverty. Your district, Senator Vargas's district, both of these places are where most of it's being used. So I think that it does serve to perpetuate that form of housing discrimination, certainly.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator McKinney. Are there other questions for this testifier? I don't see any. Thank you for being here. Next proponent.
Hi, my name is Karina McCormick, CARINAMCCORMICK. And I'm going to try really hard to only compliment things that were said, not repeat it. I do have a unique experience that I would like to share. I'm testifying as myself, to be clear, but I have extensive experience with the South of Downtown Community Development Organization here in Lincoln. Actually, we're sitting in it, in which I've just been appointed president of, and I've been involved with that for several years, and we have tried so many things to increase housing stability in this neighborhood. The neighborhood we work in is the 2 lowest census tracts in Lincoln, and we've even gone so far as to buy parcels of land and build buildings on it, get grants for that. But that process is extremely extensive, very labor intensive for the board, and also very slow in order to, get the contractors and everything like that. And so it's really not enough for nonprofits to try to work around this problem of the vouchers not being accepted. Maybe way down the line, but there's also not enough land for nonprofits to come in and try to build new affordable housing or even private equity-driven groups. Like equity in terms of like they're trying to be socially just, not investment equity. And we have progress we're really excited about, but that's going to be several years from now. We are making sure that it will accept Section 8, but there's only so much we can do. Meanwhile, all of these existing apartments are sitting here that are part of the tools that are available, that are well researched, and are decided to be necessary. And, the senators here, you all make these policies, and this has been proven as an essential policy tool, but the independent actions of the landlords who refuse to accept the vouchers are thwarting the ability of policy to be implemented. And the implication of that is that people cannot have safe homes that give their children the stability that they need to learn and grow. I'm sure other people are going to, either have or will give more research about that stability, and that's what we all want. And I just really want us to think of these vouchers as something that's been established as an effective tool that somebody else is coming in and stopping that policy from being able to be implemented, and it hurts everyone.
All right, thank you. Are there questions for this testifier? I don't see any today. Thank you for being here. Next proponent.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Jamie Gibson. It is JAIMEGIBSON. I am here to represent the Bellevue Housing Agency serving Sarpy County. I am the Section 8 Director. Today I have a letter from one of our current tenants who is also our resident advisor on our board. She states, the LB248 is a bill I support because it recognizes the increasing issue of legal discrimination towards single parents, large families, gender, race, elderly, disabled, low, and very low income. By not passing this essential bill, Nebraska is basically banning the populations I mentioned from living in Nebraska, or they are to be homeless in our great state. Being denied affordable and safe housing is a pox on what Nebraska promotes locally, nationally, and globally, the good life. I have a Section 8 choice voucher. I have used it in 2 Nebraska cities for about 7 years. I have no criminal record, never a late rent payment or lease violations. I am a retired educator, college learning resource program and assistant professor specializing in coaching special need learners at colleges and high schools. I have no vices. I serve my community as an advocate and educator for persons on seeking a Section 8 housing choice voucher. Being retired, I live a quiet artist's life. I am elderly, 74, and have multiple physical and medical disabilities. I would like to move from my current home to something more appropriate for my needs. I have made approximately 400 phone calls, PMs, texts, or emails to property managers over the last 3 years seeking safe housing. Landlords have seemed eager to rent to me until I ask them if they accept Section 8. At that time, they become abrupt and tell me no and terminate our discussion. Please help me and other women and men who rely on Section 8 to live in safe and affordable housing. Thank you for taking the time to listen to us today and to take our needs of our constituents into priority. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Are there questions for this testifier? Don't see any. Thank you so much for being here. Next proponent.
Good afternoon. My name is Jess Giesecke. That's Jessgieseke. I am a longtime resident of Lincoln, Nebraska, and I'm a landlord. I'm here representing myself today. And I own an apartment building in the historic Mount Emerald District. As a property owner, I put a lot of effort, time, and money into restoring my 120-year-old units, and they are clean. They're very high-quality units, and in addition to being charming, they are furnished with energy-efficient appliances, on-site laundry, and secured entry. They are also affordable, as I rent them out at about 80% of what would be considered fair market value. A household making the median income in my census block can afford to rent one of my units. By the way, that census block is actually below the median income, average median income of all of Lincoln. So while being landlord has hardly been an easy job, I've been very fortunate to have great tenants. In the past 12 years that I've owned my apartment building, I have returned over 85% of the security deposit dollars paid by renters and can count on one hand the number of times I've received a late payment. Regardless of their source of income, my tenants have taken great care of their apartments and they pay their rent on time. Over the years, my tenants have included Indigenous persons, people of color, LGBTQ folks, individuals with disabilities, single men, expecting mothers, and a Catholic family. Under the Federal Fair Housing Act, I would be prohibited from discriminating or denying them tenancy based on the above-mentioned statuses. However, I could have easily denied any one of these tenants housing based on their source of income, as not all have been regular W-2 reported employment income, and as their role of main means of paying rent. I'm proud to say that I continue to uphold my obligation not to deny housing to tenants of protected classes, and I will never discriminate based on their source of income. When a person with traditional employment compensation as their sole means of paying rent are given preferential treatment, housing inequity, lack of affordable housing, and gentrification are invited into urban neighborhoods. Low to moderate income residents have to seek out housing further away from accessible public transportation, schools, work, service agencies, grocery stores, and other necessities. This discrimination makes life especially difficult for individuals with disabilities, single parents, people escaping domestic violence, the elderly, low income, and many people that rely on public assistance programs to help cover household expenses. It disproportionately affects historically marginalized communities, perpetuates housing insecurity within my community, and it puts financial stability further out of reach for a huge number of Nebraskans.
Thank you for your testimony. The clock is ready. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you for being here today. Proponents? First, next proponent. Welcome to your judiciary.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Lizzie Turner, Lizzie-Turner. You will be hearing from me later this afternoon in a different capacity, but for now I am here to share the testimony of a community member. This person wishes to remain anonymous due to safety concerns and requested that I share their story on their behalf. I am a person that has experienced source of income discrimination directly, and I am sharing my story in support of LB248. This bill can save other Nebraskans from going through the grueling and demeaning process of searching desperately just trying to find one decent landlord who is willing to accept housing vouchers. I applied to the housing voucher program in October of 2021. I had been struggling due to my disability and had to leave work. I became homeless and had nowhere to live. When I applied for the voucher, I was originally told it would be an 18-month wait, but due to my disability, I was moved up the list and received my voucher in January of 2022. Over the 2 months' time, I had to find a landlord that would accept my voucher. I spent all day, every day, looking for and contacting properties. By the end of those 2 months, I had contacted about 200 different properties across the city of Lincoln. Only 4 or 5 of them were willing to take my voucher. One of them had a year-long waiting list, another had no openings at all. One of these supposedly available units I got a tour of. It was an incredibly sketchy situation. He had no website or work email, but I was running out of options. The ceiling of this unit was caving down nearly 2 feet. It was filthy with crumbling walls and a stench of cat urine. He told me he would clean the carpets and tack up the ceiling, but it was obvious it was a bigger issue caused by water damage. The place should have been condemned. I remember being terrified, thinking that this would be the conditions I would have to live in. I thought maybe I should just keep living in my car. It would be better than this. Miraculously, I eventually found a livable unit. I had passed the building and saw a for rent sign outside. I called and was relieved that they would accept my voucher. It was clean and decent and had basic maintenance. I searched harder than anyone should have had to search. Out of the approximately 200 units I called, it was the only livable available apartment that would take my Section 8. It was just sheer luck that I found this one. The process of searching for a unit was incredibly burdensome and degrading. Many of these properties required a $20 to $40 application fee that is not covered by the voucher. When I would call to ask if they would accept Section 8, I was often met with smugness that was so demeaning. One person even asked me if I would use their unit to start a roach farm. The discrimination against voucher holders is very real. No one should have to go through this. There are a lot of injustices in this world, and I hope that this bill can help to alleviate some of that injustice so that all voucher users are able to secure safe, accessible housing and dignity. Please advance this bill. Thank you for your time.
Well, he's reading somebody else's testimony. Next proponent. Next proponent. Welcome to your judiciary.
Hello, thank you for having me. I'm speaking on behalf of, or for myself, but also on behalf of, I guess, another community member who is a good friend of mine, who didn't feel comfortable coming here because she is not social anxiety, I guess. My friend was trafficked, and she ended up in Lincoln, and she ended up having being able to have a Section 8 voucher. And I just want to talk about the very real discrimination that happens not just to her, but to everybody, and because I've talked to other people that got Section 8 vouchers. And it ended up being that she would just call places, and that would be the first question out of her mouth was whether or not they took Section 8 vouchers. And it was, every place that she looked at, they all said, no, we don't take Section 8 vouchers. And that's the kind of open discrimination that this bill can alleviate or can eliminate, basically, is that, if it had been the case, if this law gets passed and something like that happened for her in the future, she wouldn't be suing somebody if there was one or two people that said no, but nobody says yes, and all the landlords feel safe and expecting that that's just the standard, and so the other thing I wanted to mention is that from what I understand about the process of going in and inspecting the units, what they're inspecting for are things that are already required under the law. So if they're already compliant, then there isn't a problem. It's just that we're not inspecting all the units anyway. So it's not anything, there's no surprises there. They're just requirements. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee? Can you spell your name for the record?
I'm sorry. Yeah. It's Micah, M-I-C-A-H, Leamer, L-E-A-M-E-R.
Thank you. Seeing no questions, thank you for being here.
Okay, thank you.
Next proponent. Ex-proponent. Oh, he tricked me. He got up and walked out, so I thought he was coming up to I fall for it every once in a while. Next proponent. Welcome.
Good afternoon, members of the Judiciary Committee. My name is Jeffrey Owusu Ansah. That is JEFFREYOWUSUANSAH. I am a student attorney for the Housing Justice Clinic at the University of Nebraska College of Law. I am testifying in support of LB248 in my personal capacity as a student of the law and a housing advocate. I support LB248 because it will help Nebraskans by decreasing the chance that families become homeless. As a country and as a state, we protect many groups from discrimination under the law. However, we still permit discrimination in housing based on a family's source of income. Through source of income discrimination, we as a state tolerate discrimination based upon not if someone could pay to access housing, but how someone could pay, which should be irrelevant. Source of income discrimination has broad negative impacts on an already extremely vulnerable population, the poor. Passing LB 248 can only create positive opportunities. I am going to state 3 reasons why I urge this committee to support LB 248. First, passing LB 248 will have the direct benefit of decreasing homelessness in our state. Frequently, when I am working with a family on the brink of eviction, the facts are tragic: sickness, temporary job loss, or an unexpected bill. But often there's hope that they can get on their feet with some form of rental assistance. We've seen many occasions where money distributed from emergency rental assistance programs has repaired tenant-landlord relationships and kept them financially solvent. There is no reason a landlord should shun other housing subsidies like a housing voucher. Secondly, by supporting LB 248, we can improve welfare across our state. In the past month, I have had the opportunity to represent tenants in eviction hearings at the Lancaster County Courthouse. In this short time, I represent families with young kids, and I know that facing instability of this sort can disrupt children at an incredibly formative time in their lives. Finally, I support LB 248 because source of income anti-discrimination laws can increase the chance that families find housing. To address some potential concerns, I want to highlight that this bill helps vulnerable renters without taking power away from landlords. LB 248 would not prevent landlords from performing any other lawful screening of potential tenants. This means we can increase options for renters without decreasing income received by landlords. So at the end of the day, landlords can get paid and the state can decrease homelessness. I urge this committee to support LB 248, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Next, proponent. Thanks for letting me know. Any other proponents? Any other proponents? Welcome. Go ahead, sir.
My name is Jada Bolles, JALLAHBOLAY. I'm glad to be here today, and let me just say all protocol observed. And I'm just going to compliment all of the profound points that most of the speakers have already made, so I won't be going over most of them, but to just give our supporting point from where I come from. Well, as a person who have been actively affected as a result of, I would say, primarily retaliation, prosecution, and as a result of my religious principles and that of social transformative social views, I've come to have a first-hand experience, which is a key thing. Experience plays a key factor and gives you a deeper understanding when you walk in the shoes of people. You get to understand from a very first-hand experience. And I would just say, upright, I do support every necessary initiative to decrease homelessness. Homelessness is something that nobody should really face. It is counterproductive to our economy, and it destroys hopes of our young people especially. And like I said, I'm supporting every effort that's going to decrease, every effort necessary to decrease homelessness. I've seen a lot being out there. As a person who's actively been affected as a result of homelessness, like I said, based on the factor that I just mentioned, my religious principle as well as transformative social standards of views, seeing out there and interacting with other people who are homeless, I just think it's very terrible because it leads to a vicious cycle. If a person's homeless, they don't even have a chance to have decent sleep, which makes them even more vulnerable and susceptible to a lot of social crimes, which will even prevent them from even taking subsidy to get back on their feet. So every necessary measure that is necessary to prevent that is going to be very helpful for our state, because there are just so many worse things that goes on out there. Number one, for ladies, especially female kids who are vulnerable, it just places them very much at the grace and mercy of predators who are out there. And these are things that does not really add value to our society. Our world needs hope. And home plays a key role in that. And not just home, but safe home. Home that is free from that of malicious intent. And I also support a couple of bills over there. That's also going to help to have a clean slate for people who are out there who need to get back on their feet and get them out of the system by creating a system that's positive. So like I said, thank you all for your effort. With much ado, let's look forward to a very productive society, and thank you all for your work you do, and I'm going to stop it right here for now.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
Next proponent. I'm having a hard time. Next proponent. Seeing none, we will move to opponents. First opponent.
My name is Rick McDonald, R-I-C-K-M-C-D-O-N-A-L-D. I'm president of the Metropolitan Omaha Property Owners Association in Omaha, Nebraska. We're opposed to this bill. I hear a lot so far today about the discrimination against the Section 8 people. From my organization, from the feedback I get in my personal experience, it's not the tenants, it's the Section 8 program itself. It's very dysfunctional, it's poorly managed, and it's very hard to work through their system. In order to give you a couple of examples, personal cases just of my own, I've dealt with them for over 20 years. In the last couple of years, it's near to impossible to try and work with them. I had a rent coming from Section 8 that didn't show up. It's automatically deposited into your account. It doesn't show up. There's no letter. There's no phone call. No reason. All my properties that were Section 8 didn't get any rent paid. You call down there, you can't get through on the phone. If you leave a message, they don't call back. If you send an email, you don't hear from them. I've actually had to have some of my tenants try to contact their workers down there so I could ask questions. With that rent not being, they had me come in for a meeting. We had 4 meetings over the course of a month. In order to find out what happened to it, they said, you were overpaid $500. They automatically deposited it in my account. So being overpaid by $500, which I couldn't find, they kept all the rent on all the properties. Once we went through this, they said, we're working on it, we're working on it. We're pushing the second month where they're not going to pay any rents on any properties because of this $500. And you're talking thousands of dollars in rent I don't get for my business. In the end, they finally called me and said, well, our computer said we overpaid you by $500. Turns out the computer was wrong. We didn't check it. Sorry about that. Let's move on. Last year, I had a property that couldn't pass inspection. They inspected it in February. The only issue they had, they said, was touch up some of the paint on the outside. This is in February. They failed it. I touched up what I could. I wanted to do it right. I'm going to change some of the siding, anything that needs to paint the whole house. He came back, re-inspected. I said, how'd we do? He says, you're going above and beyond what we asked. Thanks a lot. I got a letter a few days later. It failed. They came back out to re-inspect after I'd done some more work on it, and I said, what's the issue? They failed it again. I said, because of that one spot in the corner. I said, it's 35 degrees outside. I'm wearing a winter coat, 2 stories up on a ladder. It's 40-mile-an-hour wind. I'll get to that corner. He says that corner's not a problem. It's the new siding that you put on that hasn't been painted yet.
Thank you for your time. Thank you for your testimony. Any questions from the committee? Senator McKinney, followed by Senator Geis.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. Where are your rentals primarily located? In areas of high poverty or in areas of higher income?
Mine are, most of them are around the Crossroads area, if you know where that 72nd Dodge Street area. They're not in South Omaha, they're not in East Omaha, they're not in North Omaha, pretty much west of 72nd Street.
Do you have issues with people around your rental properties not wanting individuals that are on public assistance to live at your property?
Do I have trouble with them?
Yeah.
No, the Section 8 people are great.
No, I'm talking about the neighbors. not wanting those individuals in those areas?
I don't know most of the neighbors in those areas. I'll have a house, I don't know who's around it.
So you've never heard any comments about why are you allowing people with Section 8 to live here?
Nobody's ever questioned me on that.
All right, thank you.
Senator Geis.
I'm just curious. I know that you're going through the details of your inspection, but are there things that you have to do to satisfy Section 8 housing that are over and above just regular housing, or is it just that Section 8 is the minimum standard?
They don't require me to do anything. If a city inspector came out, they said you need to do this, they're pretty much in line with them.
Okay.
I don't have an issue most of the time if they have something on there that I need to do. I don't have a problem with it. I understand it. And for 20 years, I went through this, and you get to know the inspectors, you know what they expect, and I could get through without an issue. My problems come up in the last couple of years with an inspector I've never dealt with. And over the last 2 years, this one inspector has never passed a property of mine and has never required the tenant to fix anything. And even my tenant said, he doesn't like you. And I requested a different inspector. So let's try a different inspector.
If you request a different inspector, will a different one come out? Is that complied with, or?
No, they say, no, we can't do that.
Okay.
You get who you get. I've never dealt with this guy before, but, you know, for 20 years, it worked great for me. I promoted it all the time. Over the last several years, it's just gone downhill to, they abated 4 months of my rent because of the paint on the outside, and how can you expect me to paint it in February or March? They said, ask for an extension. I did. They gave me 8 days. So, and I lost 4 months of their rent because of that. So it's always something with them, and you can't function when you don't know when the rent's coming. You don't know if it's going to come.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you for being here. Next opponent.
My name is Dennis Tierney, T-E-N-N-I-S-T-I-E-R-N-E-Y. Chair Wayne and Senators, LB 248 creates another protected class of individual that is based on source of income. There's no such nationally recognized class of individual. This is a bad precedent and opens up the door for anyone to apply to the legislature to have themselves declared as a protected class based on what they think are their unique circumstances of victimhood. The bill would result in discrimination claims being laid against landlords who discern that a prospective tenant is a poor risk because they don't have a stable source of income. This is akin to telling a bank or a car dealer that they have to give a loan to an individual without considering their ability to repay the loan. We all saw that a disaster similar policies had on the financial industry in the 2008-2009 financial crisis. Specifically, this law forces landlords to accept voucher program individuals or risk being sued for discrimination. When this law was proposed in 2021, Chairman Lathrop asked the Fair Housing Organization if a landlord doesn't have any Section 8 tenants, would they sue that landlord on the basis that mere lack of Section 8 tenants proves discrimination, and they affirmed that they would sue on that basis. So just mere lack of Section 8 tenants proves you're discriminating. That's what the Fair Housing Organization said. Senators, this law will result in significant increase in the cost of the residential rental business. There's already a crisis of lack of affordable housing, and this law will result in more landlords leaving the business, and those remaining will be forced to increase rents to try to recoup these costs. This will result in less, not more, affordable housing. Many landlords with whom I've spoken refuse Section 8 because they found OHA almost impossible to work with, much like what Rick just said. I urge you to reject LB 248. Instead of forcing landlords to accept a flawed OHA, force the administrators of the OHA to work with landlord groups to make it a more viable voluntary program that works for both the tenant and the landlord. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Senator DeVore?
I do have a question for you. You mentioned without considering their ability to pay, that that forcing them to accept the vouchers is forcing them to accept it without the ability to pay. That's the piece that I wanted to ask you about. Wouldn't they have the voucher to pay, and couldn't you also look at their total source of income to determine if they could cover the rest of the portion of that? My understanding is under this bill, you would be able to still do a background check on the amount of income that they had.
Correct. You can.
Okay.
But if you do that and your result is you don't have any Section 8 tenants, you're going to get sued by the fair housing people because they said that the mere lack of, that's what they said in 2021. They said the mere lack of having Section 8 proves you're discriminating just by the lack of having Section 8. So they're going to sue you if you don't have any Section 8. That's what the fair housing people said in 2021.
We'll have to ask them. I think that would maybe be evidence, but I don't think it would be proof. But we'll definitely ask them.
Well, that's what they said in 2021.
Yeah. Okay.
Chairman Lathrop asked them.
Okay. Yeah.
You were there.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember back.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Yep.
Next, opponent.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Chairman Wayne, members of the Judiciary Committee. My name is Gene Eckel. That's Genebeckel. I'm a board member for the Apartment Association of Nebraska and the Nebraska Association of Commercial Property Owners, appearing today on behalf of both associations in opposition to LB 248. The Section 8 Housing Choice Voucher Program is a federal program regulated, controlled, and funded by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, and it was created by Congress to be a voluntary program. The state of Nebraska, nor any of its cities or counties, have any oversight or control over the program or the public housing agencies. In line with Congress's intent, both associations oppose this legislation's mandate for housing providers in Nebraska to participate in a program due to the overburdensome regulatory requirements. The handout that I've provided shows the difference between the standard leasing process and the process for the housing choice voucher leasing. Some of the overburdensome regulatory requirements that a housing provider must comply with when participating in the voucher program include the housing provider must enter into a housing assistance payments or HAP contract with the housing authority and comply with the added lease terms and administrative responsibilities contained in the HAP contract. Delayed inspections by the housing authority of the housing prior to move-in and annually. Possible delay in rental payments at any point during the lease term without recourse due to federal budget appropriation delays, lengthy administrative processes, and even arbitrary withholding of payments by the housing authority. And lastly, mandated termination policies and procedures, including strict limits on when a housing provider may evict a resident for what reason they can do it so. Some of those who will testify after me can educate you on how these overburdensome regulations actually work as a disadvantage to individuals and families that use the housing vouchers. Instead of mandating participation in a federal program that is problematic, a better option to improve availability of rental housing for voucher holders would be to increase funding for the program and reducing the bureaucratic requirements associated with it. Currently, the U.S. House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate have introduced versions of the Choice and Affordable Housing Act. That is H.R. 680 and S32. Both pieces of legislation seek to provide $500 million for signing bonuses to landlords, provide bonuses for housing authorities, and provide security deposit assistance. Use neighborhood-specific data to set rents fairly for landlords and reduce inspection delays. We urge you to not advance LB 248 to general file. Thank you for your time, and I would be happy to answer any questions that I can. Otherwise, the people that follow me can answer your questions for you.
Any questions from the committee? Senator McCain.
Thank you. And thank you for your testimony. So are you saying that with the assistance and things like that is too cumbersome for landowners?
The regulatory requirements that are controlled by HUD, the way they operate or the way they are funded by HUD makes it difficult for those programs to operate effectively. You've heard a lot today about the Housing Authority in Lincoln. That might work well. OHA, you're going to hear a lot of problems about today.
Is it hard for you to understand those processes, or the processes are too lengthy?
I'm going to defer to the people who are going to follow me so they can take you through the process, because they have been in the industry for decades and have been working with Section 8 voucher programs for decades. So I will let them answer those questions for you.
Did you help write the standard lease for the apartment association?
I review it.
And if that's so, do you think tenants fully? How long are they?
What's that?
How long are they?
How many pages?
Yes.
The lease itself is 8 pages long.
And that's not. So how long is the average piece of paperwork that you have to do or go through for a voucher for OHA?
The HAP contract, I don't know how long that is. And again, depending on the program, though, if you're dealing with a HUD lease, it's completely separate. And I don't recall how many pages that the HUD lease is. There's different leases. Sometimes a landlord may be required to use the lease that's used by the housing authority. But again, I will let the people who follow me be able to answer that question for you. But the NEA lease that you're referring to is 8 pages, the main part of the lease.
So if on the other side, what you had to read through or sign or whatever, if it was 8 pages, would that be too much or too little?
I think it's just about right. I mean, obviously everyone needs to read a contract before you sign it, and they had the opportunity to take the time and read it. I don't think it's complicated, but I think it's just about right. 8 pages isn't too long.
So if it was less complicated, you wouldn't have a problem with it?
With the less complicated with the lease?
With whatever the vouchers
Well,
program is.
Our problem with the voucher program is, well, first of all, I would say that the HAP contract and even the HUD lease needs to be updated. It's way behind the times. But I can't really, I don't know if I'm answering your question. I apologize if I'm frustrating you, but we would not agree to the terms right now as they're written, especially on the HUD lease, because they leave out a lot that would not. For example, if a tenant or tenant's occupants are harassing other neighbors or the staff, that's not covered as a lease violation in the HUD lease. And according to state statute, it's violations under the lease or another section of the Landlord-Tenant Act. But there's some things that in that lease are just so outdated that it really does not leave any protection for the landlord or other tenants.
So what protections are in it for the tenant when a landlord or a property manager is being rude and being offensive and harassing them?
Well, if it's harassment, then I think that's something they could, depending on what the harassment's about.
It's not always harassment, though.
True, but you mentioned that as one of your examples. Depending on if someone is perhaps maybe of a protected class, they believe the harassment's based on that, then they can seek redress under the Fair Housing Act of Nebraska or the Federal Fair Housing Act. If it's something that they believe they're being harassed by the landlord and it's covered by the Landlord-Tenant Act, they can seek redress under the Landlord-Tenant Act.
All right, thank you.
Sure.
Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Senator.
Next opponent. Welcome.
Oh, thank you. Senator Vargas, or Senator Wayne, I'm sorry. And the members of the judiciary, my name is Lynn Fisher, Lynnfisher, and I represent the Statewide Property Owners Association and the Real Estate Owners and Managers Association here in Lincoln. And I sent out as comment online our basic statement. I think just to save time and not to recover all the same territory that you've heard, I'd like to fill in a few gaps here in the testimony and answer a couple questions that were asked earlier. So generally, we're opposed to LB248 as a private property rights issue for us to have business processes and choices on how to best fill our properties. And we have members who own properties and those that also manage for other owners. And as a group, we have some owners that choose not to accept Section 8. We have some that will accept Section 8. They really don't care either way. As a property manager, we can handle the processes for them. And we have some that seek out Section 8. that actually try to put together a building or a group of buildings or units that they specifically seek out Section 8 tenants for obvious reasons, portion of the rent being guaranteed, et cetera. So it's a program that can be worked with, but it should be the choice of the owner. It's a private property rights choice. We ourselves serve on our own properties dozens and dozens of people on Section 8, and we're quite successful about that. We actually have, on an ongoing basis, we have Section 8 eligible units that go unfilled with Section 8 tenants every month. We have many tenants all the time that come to us with Section 8 vouchers. We're happy to help them. And there was a 20% non-filled number that was thrown out there. And I would say that that's based on folks who apply and for whatever reason don't qualify on their application. It isn't that we turn them down based on Section 8 because we're accepting that, but they're not always going to qualify. So maybe the people out there that aren't able to utilize their Section 8 vouchers, that's the reason for that. Also, if you're not aware, the Lincoln Housing Authority has several hundred properties that could be eligible for Section 8 that they choose not to utilize for that program, but they put them out on the open market, and we have to compete with them in the open market on several hundred of their units. So there's one solution, at least in the Lincoln area, to put more units out there for the folks that are on the waiting list.
Thank you for your testimony.
Sure. Any questions? I'd be happy to answer any.
Any questions from the committee? Senator Geis.
Quick one. So you're talking about, I'm just trying to be clear on, are there additional requirements if you decide to accept Section 8 as a landlord? Are there additional requirements for you that make this a different consideration than it would be if you didn't accept Section 8?
Well, yes. I mean, you've heard talk about the inspection process. Mm-hmm. There's the HAP agreement, which has certain different types of requirements and regulations than a standard lease, even under the Landlord-Tenant Act. So, for example, for us to be able to give a rent increase, at least in Lincoln, we have to give a 60-day notice as opposed to standard 30-day notice required by the Landlord-Tenant Act. In Omaha, they have a different program altogether. We do manage one Section 8 property in Omaha, and we were unsuccessful in raising the rent for nearly 2 years because of their very difficult to understand regulations that we were not made aware of in the very beginning. So that cost us probably a few $1,000s.
So do those costs then drive up your rent?
They do, yeah. This program, this bill, if passed, will certainly increase our owner costs that have to be passed on to tenants, increased rents. Yes.
Which then kind of counteracts the whole intent.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from the committee?
Thank you.
Seeing none. At this rate, I might be able to drive to Lincoln and drive to Omaha to my daughter's basketball party and come back. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Chairman Wayne, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Corby Gilbertson. It's spelled KorbyGilbertson. Appearing today as registered lobbyist on behalf of the Nebraska Realtors Association. I'm going to take us in a little bit of a different direction. You've heard a lot about rental agreements and renters this afternoon. The realtors represent both commercial and residential practitioners who represent owners of as well as commercial, residential, and both single-family and multi-family investment properties throughout the states. We are concerned that this proposal might have some unintended consequences that you haven't been discussed yet today. I'm going to give you an example. If you have a property owner that needs to sell their home and they decide they want to do a cash sale because they can't afford to do any of the repairs to the home and they choose not to do those repairs, if there would be an FHA or a VA loan, they would not be able to do that. They would be required under this to follow FHA or VA requirements, and that would restrict them from how they can sell their home. So that is, I'm going to cut off there because I know you have a long day ahead of you. So I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Next opponent. Next opponent. Welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, committee. Thank you for your time. My name is Christy Lamb, K-R-I-S-T-Y-L-A-M-B. I'm the Vice President at MP Dodge Management Company, and I'm also a member of the Institute of Real Estate Management and the local apartment association. To provide context, we currently oversee about 4,000 apartments in the Lincoln, Omaha, and Council Bluffs area, and about 40% of those properties are dedicated to low-income and moderate-income housing, and we successfully work with about 6 different housing authorities presently and work with them as a part of that housing choice voucher system. That being said, we are still opposed to LB248 for a number of reasons. We do believe we are a third-party management company, so we do believe wholeheartedly that our property owners should have the ability to choose on whether or not they would like to participate in that program, even though we are proponents of the program itself and would support any efforts in order to increase the funding associated with those programs so that we can work with them to build more affordable and low-income housing in the communities as well. Specifically, the language in the bill, I see it first referenced potentially on page 5, where it uses the word any. It requires the property owner to comply with any requirement of any federal, state, or local public general assistance and housing program. And to one of the questions earlier, the participation in this program does require specific requirements, including execution of a contract between the property owner and the housing voucher provider. And so this gives the housing voucher provider 100% control over the terms and conditions of that contract and little recourse on the part of the property owner if they have concerns with the nature of that. We have heard about, obviously, inspections. I'm happy to answer questions on what that would look like and the timing of it. On average, we hold units on average an extra 30 to up to 60 days.
Any thoughts?
By morning, average of 30 to 60 days. While we kind of work through that process, I wish all housing providers, not all of them are able to administrate the program equally. We saw members of Bellevue Housing. They're actually fairly easy to work with, but unfortunately your largest housing voucher provider is one of the most difficult to work with. And it could be anywhere from restricting rent increases. I have 5 properties that haven't received their funds in 3 months. Over $10,000 easily between those 5 properties that we're still working through to get those funds. There's highly large inconsistencies in inspection requirements and our ability to correct those. And we do have situations that often go above and beyond safe housing. We want to provide safe housing. That's what we're in the business of doing. But some of the requirements go above and beyond that. So it just makes it really difficult for us to be able to work with them in the manner that's, I think, for the intent of the program, while still managing our fiduciary responsibilities to our property owners.
Thank you. Any questions from the Senator Board?
Thank you. So let me, because I've heard this a few times, the contract that you're talking about that you would have to sign with the housing voucher provider. That's, what did they call that?
It's called a HAP contract, a housing assistance payments contract. So often we have our rental agreements with the participant, and then we have to sign a separate contract between the property owner and the housing voucher program provider.
And the concern is that it's a form contract that you have to sign and you may not like what's in the form?
Correct. It gives them 100% control of the terms and conditions of that contract that we have to follow. Absolutely.
Which is kind of what you all do with tenants. They have to sign a form contract.
Correct, but they have a choice, right, of where they live in the terms and conditions of that contract. And there's also restrictions on what we can put in our leases within the bounds of Nebraska landlord-tenant law. But for example, kind of inconsistencies on those inspections, obviously we will always replace the smoke detector as of number 1. That's not a big deal. But we've had other situations where it's either damages caused by the resident or we'll fix it and then they repeatedly cause it, or just their failure to allow the inspector in the unit will cause a unit to fail, and we have zero recourse other than issuing those residents a lease violation for failure to comply. But eventually, once that is abated, there's no recourse for us to recoup those funds regardless of what caused the failed housing inspection. There was a question earlier on timing. Yes, on that initial inspection, if there's something in the unit, we have a couple new construction affordable housing projects in the Omaha area where one of the bedrooms doesn't meet the HUD requirements for egress, but it does meet SOTI code requirements. So the only way that we can use those 3-bedroom apartments is to offer them to voucher participants if they have a 2-bedroom that still fits under our 3-bedroom rate, or we have to lower the rate for that 3-bedroom so someone with a 2-bedroom voucher could use it because it doesn't meet those minimum requirements in those particular cases. So we could back away and say, nope, this isn't going to work because that unit doesn't fit for that particular case. But when it comes up for the annual inspection, in a perfect world, that annual inspection would occur prior to the next renewal, but they're so far behind on their inspections, it usually occurs after we've already engaged them in a renewal process. And so if the unit fails then it could be in a situation where rent is 100% embedded for the entire rest of the term of the contract, and we don't have any recourse.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Next opponent. Next opponent.
Good afternoon. My name is Dana Steffen, D-A-N-A-S-T-E-F-F-A-N. I'm a residential property manager here in Lincoln. We only manage properties inside the city limits of Lincoln. And I have a problem with just the Lincoln Housing Authority and the way the program is administered here in town. We do have a lot of properties that are the old military housing based out in Air Park, the duplexes out there. And the Lincoln Housing Authority does have quite a few of those. And I lose tenants to the Housing Authority quite often for market rate rents. They're not renting to people with housing vouchers. They take tenants out of my property and put them in their properties because their rates are consistently $200 to $300 lower than ours. Their properties are upkept better because they have staff and maintenance to take care of them. So my opposition is just the way the program is run or administered through the Lincoln Housing Authority. As a property management company, we have chosen not to accept Section 8 housing vouchers. We will take them if there is a current tenant in place and they apply and are approved for a voucher. We will go through the process and get them on board. Or if a property is purchased and the Section 8 tenant is in place already. Currently, starting January 1st, we required our tenants to have renter's insurance, proof of renter's insurance. I am still waiting for Lincoln Housing Authority to get back to me if that is going to be allowed at the lease renewal for the few tenants that I do have on Section 8. It just holds up the whole program. And I guess I just wanted to let you know, it has nothing to do with the tenants. Section 8 tenants, they're lovely, they pay their rent, they do great. It's the way the program is administered, and I feel that they really have some work to do on that end before that it can be openly accepted by all landlords.
Thank you for being here. Any other questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Next opponent. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm pleased to speak before the committee. My name is Pierce Carpenter, Piercecarpenter. I've been a landlord for 36 years. I am opposed to LB248. Most of the information's already been given, but I did look up some stuff. So a typical fine for a fair housing problem is $10,000 for the first offense and $50,000 for the third offense. And then if it goes to court, you're probably looking at another $70,000 or more. So, I mean, if you just average it out, you figure $100,000 per case. If you get 100 cases in Omaha, that's, what is that, $10 million? Omaha's annual rent roll with 96,000 units is about $1 billion. So that's basically a $10 increase on the average. For if they were all $1,000 a month apartments, that'd be a $10 increase on all the apartments in Omaha to cover that. I mean, if you believe in the market concept of the rental business, then if there are additional charges, everybody's still going to try to get the same return. So the tenants are going to, the good tenants that are paying the rent are going to have to pay that. Second thing is, one of the things, when I read that bill, I found it confusing, and it was very annoying because my big question was, can I still use my 3 times rent rule? So for example, if I have somebody with Section 8 come and they get an $800 voucher and they're making $1,200, does that mean that I can consider their income as $2,000, which we always use 3 times the rent, so they wouldn't qualify, because if the rent's $800, they'd have to make $2,400. So can you use that 3 times rule? It's not clear in the documentation, and so my belief is you cannot use that rule. Let's see, I had one other comment. I think Aaron Feichinger or something said that this was the landlord-tenant day. It's really not. It's the landlord housing advocate day, because there's only one tenant here, and the rest of them are housing advocates, people that are politically involved, people that have organizations that cater and make money off these tenants, people that have government programs in their pocket and they want to profit by it. So that covers everything I wanted to say. So thank you for listening. And if you have any questions, otherwise.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee? Senator McKinney.
Yes, sir, Mr. Senator McKinney.
Thank you, Senator Wayne, and thank you for your testimony. So as a landlord, do you not make money off the tenants?
Yes.
And do you not think that they have rights as well?
Yes.
And do you not see an issue with denying them based on them taking public assistance?
I don't have a problem with where the money comes from. What I have a problem with is the Section 8 organization that causes you problems. I mean, the classical case in Section 8, this is a story I heard from Paul Wojcicki. They tell you that we've discovered that your refrigerator, you're charging for it, but yet your lease doesn't have it in it. So they don't pay rent on that unit, and they don't pay rent on 10 units, or for the 5 other units you got. And then you call Section 8, and it takes 3 months to resolve. But if you're a company like Landmark Management, where you got a lawyer that deals with Section 8 on a regular basis, when that happens, that problem goes directly to that lawyer. That lawyer calls over to Section 8, and that problem is handled within a few days, and they get their rent. Meanwhile, I wouldn't get 5 rents for 3 months. So, I mean, that type of a problem, plus accepting all of the issues in the HAP contract and the other peculiar things that when I took Section 8, which has been like 15 years, they went through my contract and said, you can't do this, can't do this, can't do this, can't do this. And it was tolerable, and I went ahead and read it to them, and then at the end of the contract, I didn't get the check, and I called and called and called, and finally I found out the guy was moving out. And they were colluding and not telling me he was moving out. I've never dealt with them since then. It's not the money or the source of the money. It's what they put you through to get it, and the high risk of really getting jerked around hard.
Would it be fair to say that if your anger is with the entity that pushes out the vouchers or administers the program, shouldn't you take your anger out on them? And I say this because I think if you did that, there wouldn't be a need for LB248 or these other bills. These bills come because tenants' rights are being violated, and they have been discriminated against by land and property owners. As much as many say that it doesn't happen, it happens. So that's where I think you should channel your energy.
I agree 100%. You're absolutely correct. The issue on the table, though, is you can't deal with Section 8. They won't deal with you. You have to. The only thing you got is you got a digital program. You either take them or you don't. And if you take them, then you've bought into Section 8. You got to deal with Section 8. You can't really get after Section 8. They won't take your calls.
But you still take the program.
If I could use my 3 times rent rule, I would rent to Section 8.
And it's probably not for you. I find it really weird and crazy that landlords and property managed owners ask for 3 times the rent from people who are not making a lot of money. A lot of these individuals come from areas of poverty or low socioeconomic backgrounds where it might not be that easy to have 3 times the rent, but you ask it and then you say, oh, we offer affordable housing. But if you look at the median income of these areas where most of the renters are renting, that's impossible. So I don't understand that. You want to use a policy to ask for 3 times the rent, when in reality, most of the people that are on public assistance, most likely, or it will be hard for them to come up with 3 times the rent. So honestly, in translation, it feels like you're discriminated against them again because of their economic status.
Well, I mean, the whole screening process to get a good tenant takes those economics into consideration. If the situation was different and I couldn't find anybody to rent, yeah, I would reduce that 3 times. But I'm not having that problem, and I would rather accept someone who has 3 times rent than somebody who has less. You know, the reason for that 3 times rent is if the guy drives to work and his car has a problem and he's only at 2.5 times rent, he's got to spend $1,000 on the car. He'll never catch up in the rent.
So basically you're saying unless you're in an economic position where if you come into a hardship because of, for example, a car repair, that you should only rent to those people, only rent to people who are making a substantial amount of money to where if they end up in economic hardship, they can still pay the rent. That's the only people you want to rent to.
That's true, but we have units rent for $650. So that would.
So where are the people who are not making that amount of money supposed to go?
You know,
homeless shelters, living on the streets.
I'm not providing it. You know, I wish I could be, a be all end all and just.
I'm not saying you have to, but I'm just saying that's the reality that we're left with. Either we figure out a way to house people who don't have the most, or we end up with a huge homeless population and people living on the streets and people complaining about crime, coming down here saying we need to lock people up because they're homeless. Then people want to build and spend and waste taxpayer dollars on prisons and jails. That's what we dealing with here. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for explaining that. I was not looking at it that way. Think about it.
Thank you, Senator McKinney. Any other questions? Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Let's take our next opponent. Welcome, sir.
Yeah, my name is Scott Hoffman, Hoffman. Senator Vargas has brought this bill up several times before, and I've testified each and every single time. And this year, I've noticed a difference in the language of the bill. And one of them I've always testified was the housing doesn't pay for damages. Well, now they've got the landlord guarantee. I just talked to a couple of my colleagues, and the amount is $50,000. I don't know if that's some sort of a joke or not, but I don't think the state should be participating in trying to bail out a federal program. And that is certainly not enough money. Nobody's actually even discussed about how much rent is paid by the housing. Is it in the millions? So how does $50K cover millions of dollars worth of paid HUD funds? So I'm concerned about that. And I know that's probably why he put it in there, because I've testified and pretty tried to kill this bill every single year. Two is, I want to echo the last person here, because I was going to bring that up too. We have a lot of advocacy groups here. We have one gentleman that testified. Could be more than that. Could be an ADA situation. But I want to hear about tenants. Some people are testifying on behalf of somebody else. Senators, you're talking about creating a law that if one of us end up having to go to court in housing, that the proponents are on what we would refer to in some of your attorneys as hearsay. Okay, we don't know actually what's going on personally from the tenants themselves. So I just, got a problem with that as far as funding. That is exactly why I don't take housing. I've been doing this for 40 years, longer than more than you senators, and sometimes maybe even older than you are. But the situation here is once the going through all the red tape of trying to get people into your property and trying to find them a place to live, if it's on housing or whether they're making, in my situation, it's 2.5 times the rent. And I have had people call me on housing. I've explained it to them. I said, housing doesn't pay for damages. So, and they were very understanding. Okay, I can tell you right now, I've got a vacant property I've been trying to rent, and every one of them are coming from houses where people are selling their properties. I just got hit from the county assessor. You have another law that requires them to be assessed at 100% value. I'm looking at $10,000 in additional taxes that I got to take out on my tenants, and there's no way I'm going to be able to do that. Last time this happened in 2019, I lost half my tenants. So we have an inflationary problem. Two is the building cost, building materials and trying to find people to work. I had to work on one of my properties for 2 years because I couldn't even find anybody to help me. So we're having a real labor and building material cost of trying to keep these properties maintained, which could be another issue involved in even another bill I see about replacing lead or pipes that might be lead. You'd have to tear out ceilings. You'd have to run the plumber. You can run PEX. I had that done with one of my properties. That's extensive amount of work. And how much time are you going to have to be able to do that? Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Let's see if there are any questions. Senator Geist.
I have a question for you about when the legislature gives housing or landlords or home builders or whoever additional regulations that are over and above a safety standard, although they're all called safety standards, but some of them are over and above that.
Minimum housing codes, yeah, building codes, yeah.
Do those cost you extra? Do those codes, do those requirements, do those generally add cost to your unit?
Senator Geist, I can tell you in 40 years, I've never ever had a building inspection issue on any of my properties where they came in and said had to do something. And we've got another bill that will testify and it involves the registration, which means they'll start to come in and see something that, might have existed for decades, but this doesn't meet our minimum housing code. Okay, so we fix it. Then we got to go hire somebody to go do it. That brings up our cost. Okay, who's supposed to pay for that? Again, right now, my biggest tax deduction is property taxes. I mean, it's given a new reason for a new tax deduction. I have no idea what I'm going to do this year as far as getting my tenants to pick up that bill. And I'm going to tell you right now, I'm probably going to be eating half of it. Absolutely.
But generally, if things cost you more, you have to pass that cost on to your tenant.
We can, but it's hard. Right now, usually, say for example, you've got a $100,000 house. Years ago, we used to be able to use the 1% rule, okay? Mm-hmm. So if you had a $100,000 house, you'd be looking at $1,000 a month. Well, now those $100,000 houses are now $130,000, $140,000. So how do we raise the rent $400 a month? Right. It's called a return of money, okay, and on your investment. And with all these bills, I can tell you in the last 10 years, I wasn't here for 30 years. In the last 10 years, I'm going, hey, wait a minute. We've gone from 3 days to 7 days. We've gone to, continuances. We're just trying to get people out of property. The word here, there's a 4-letter word. It's called move. Okay, if you're not happy with your landlord, then find another place to move. And if he's violating some building codes, then that's what the building and safety is for in that area. So, yeah.
Thank you.
You bet.
Thank you, Senator Geist. Other questions? I'll ask you one.
Sure.
This is kind of a theme I'm hearing, is that one of the problems is not the Section 8 tenants, it's Section 8. Do you also agree with that?
I don't really call it discrimination. In my situations, I just don't want to participate in the program, and I think you heard a lot of testimony.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Do you agree that the program, it's not so much that you don't like the Section 8 tenants, it's that you don't like the program.
The program, yeah. Years ago, and I talked to a landlord today because I told her I was going to come down here and testify. Well, good luck. And I said, and we talked about the housing paying for damages. And it's funny because she said they used to. I go, I know. It's amazing that you know that. They used to pay the damages, and then they retracted it. Okay, now you as a state want to fund it with $50K? I mean, I'm sorry, that's a joke. I mean, you're talking maybe $1 million or more to cover lost rent, damages, and that's another thing about getting into the amount of rent due and everything, whether it's 2.5 or 3 times. Cars do break down. People need to buy food, buy clothes for their kids. That is computed into trying to devise how much people can afford if they have an issue or emergency that needs to be taken care of outside of paying the rent.
So what I was going to ask you,
Sure.
and I'll ask some of the others who might still be behind you, is what is the single biggest problem? So I've heard you guys come in and talk about this issue several years in a row, and I finally got it through my thick skull that the problem is not the Section 8 tenants, it's the Section 8 program. So what I want to know is, how do I fix the Section 8 program? Because it turns out that some of us have some of the ability to do that, so let's do that.
Well,
so what's
the question here is recourse, okay? Recourse. What do we do? And I'm going to tell you right now, I had 2 tenants last year. One was in there for 3 years, one was in there for 2 years, 10 years, they moved out. And I said, hey, wait a minute, what are you doing with all your stuff here? You gotta come get this. I told you not to smoke in there. You take off the picture, it's a big stain on the wall. I spent almost a year, but I'm just telling you, the point is, I sued them for several $1,000s, which was actually very minimal. And they paid me after I had to go take them to small claims and everything, which is also hard to do. But they claim it because I knew where they worked.
Okay.
But that's the problem is, how do you go after somebody if they're being helped with the rent, but yet how do you help them with the damages if indeed it does occur?
So the damages are something that you would like to have fixed up?
No, it's easily. It can be several $1,000s.
Perfect.
Carpet, holes in walls, windows, screens, everything, yeah.
Perfect. That is an answer we'll look into then.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions for this testifier? I don't see any. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Next opponent. Welcome.
Thank you. For the record, Nathan Haugen, Nathan Haugen. I'm a small mom and pop landlord from Omaha. And this is my first time ever being here in this building. It's quite the experience. And I can say that I have a Section 8 tenant living in one of my homes. And until 3.5 years ago, I had no experience with the Section 8 program. I can echo some of the comments with OHA and the difficulties. Unreturned phone calls, unreturned emails. I actually had to find 17th and Harney, I believe, is where their office was at, and actually walk in there to talk to somebody to answer my questions, to try to just learn about the program. There was one gentleman there who was very helpful at the time, but I think that is, I had to go to that length just to get the answers, but your emails and phone calls still go unanswered with the program. I would also say too that never having dealt with Section 8, it wasn't the fact that she was getting money from Section 8 that was my problem. It's typically the collections and other issues, credit-wise, that has to go on. But this particular applicant was stellar in every other aspect. So I gladly accepted her, and she's still in the house today, 3.5 years later, and her house is impeccably clean every time I go over there for inspections, yearly inspections. Sometimes, for whatever reason, they schedule them 6 months, 8 months apart. But I just comply with the inspection and don't really raise any issues. But with that, I just want to let you know that she's a fantastic tenant, and I wish I had more just like her. I would take them if qualified.
Are there any questions for this testifier?
May I ask one?
Senator Geist.
I'm curious, so are you in opposition to this bill, or are you for this bill?
Yes, I am in opposition. I don't think anyone should be forced to take, because there's a slippery slope, and I think that's also been mentioned.
Gotcha.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Other questions from the committee? I'll just ask you briefly, have you had any trouble with the Section 8 other than unreturned phone calls? I have that written down. and unreturned emails. Have you had other problems with working with the program that you'd like fixed?
Sometimes there's payment issues where they do mispay, and then you have to sort that out, and that's where a lot of times some other issues happen.
Okay. Thank you.
I have one more.
Oh, Senator Geist.
Sorry, one more. And I've been meaning to ask all the people who have payment issues, and I haven't. What do? Do you just pay that yourself when you're not paid, or your gentleman behind you or before you said something about $10,000 that wasn't paid for 3 months in a row? As a property owner, do you just pay that? Do you take out a loan? What do you do?
No, absolutely. So I've got a line of credit with a bank, and that's currently, has a balance, and yeah, you just have to eat it and then pay it back when you hopefully get the money.
Wow. Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, thank you for being here. Next opponent. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I am Seth Perkins. It's SETHPERKINS. I am an executive vice president at Selden Company in Omaha, and we are a third-party property management company. And we are similar to what Christy said earlier. We, are in favor of the housing voucher program in Section 8. We currently have nearly 4,000 affordable units that we manage in Nebraska, in Omaha, and throughout the state. So again, we don't have any issues or anything with generally accepting the voucher and with the program. What we are opposing with LB248 is forcing, all landlords and owners to be a part of that program. A lot of it similar to what many people have said earlier because of the issues with the Section 8 program itself. So I won't go into a lot of those issues because we have the same type of stuff with the way that it's ran. Even the payment standards, a lot of the times, I wanted to kind of point out, of the 4,000 units that we manage, someone said earlier that, we end every month with vacancy of those, approximately about 5%. So I think a lot of that is not that we're not accepting those people or they're not able to find some housing. Maybe they're being denied for other reasons, or maybe they're just not actively, trying to find housing for those. But there is housing available. I can vouch for that we do end every month again with available units that will accept the vouchers. I did want to state some of my concerns are the increased fair housing suits that this could bring, and that increased expense to the landlords to try to fight those. Somebody mentioned that it was on the person bringing those to the forefront. That would be on them to support of what was the fair housing discrepancy, but that does fall on the landlord or the owner to show that there was not that. And in many cases, when we have fair housing and other issues, most of those go where they find no finding, but it does take a lot of resources and expense to fight those and to go through. So I would kind of focus on, like what many people said, trying to improve the housing authority or the voucher program and improve that process to make it a much easier and better system for the landlords. So I'm happy to answer any questions anyone may have.
Any questions from the committee? Senator Decay. Oh, I thought you had your hand up, sorry. Sienna, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Any other opponents? Opponents? Anybody testify on a neutral capacity? Are you opponent? Neutral, come on.
We're almost done.
With one.
With this.
Welcome.
Thank you. So good afternoon. My name is Paula Gardner, Paula, Gardner. I'm the Executive Director of the Nebraska Equal Opportunity Commission. I'm here today to speak in a neutral capacity on LB248 and to answer any questions that there may be. While it's difficult to know how many additional investigations passage of this bill could result in, we do our best to absorb any additional investigative work. As this is not a basis currently covered under federal law, we would not receive any federal reimbursement from HUD for these investigations under our work share agreement. However, having a state law more expansive than federal law does not affect our substantial equivalency with HUD. It would be our hope that through our education outreach functions, we could educate respondents on this to help prevent this potential discrimination from occurring. I would like to note that the bill in its current form also is making an amendment to the Public Accommodations Law, which is on page 3, line 8. It's possible that this occurred due to the PA law and housing law still being somewhat conflated. At one time, they were one law. They were separated. People paid close attention to the housing statutes, but kind of ignored the public accommodation statutes, and so they're very incomplete and inconsistent. Aside from other questions and concerns we have about how it's structured within the context of the current statutes, our biggest concern is the requirement for the NEOC to administer the Landlord Guarantee Program. And we did submit a fiscal note on this, as we're an investigative agency. We don't have staff trained or available to administer a grant program. It's also unclear if the $50,000 noted for appropriation is the grant money or if it's for something else. Our extremely lean budget does not have any extra money to provide to landlords or pay a staff member to develop and manage the program.
Senator DeBoer.
Thank you. I think you may have heard earlier that there was some discussion about whether a lack of Section 8 tenants within a landlord's portfolio, I guess we'll call it, would be a prima facie case of discrimination on source of income. Can you speak to that issue?
Yeah, I can talk about the investigative process, how that would work. So an individual could bring to us a claim of discrimination based on a protected class. So they need to be a member of a protected class. They need to have a housing harm. From that, we take that information and then ask the respondent to respond to those allegations. It's a burden-shifting paradigm, so once we have that information back from the respondent, it shifts back to the complainant to explain why what the respondent is saying is not just incorrect, but that it's discriminatory. So simply not having Section 8 wouldn't in and of itself be an action of discrimination. We would look at all of the evidence before making a determination.
Okay. So the simple act of not having Section 8 would not, in and of itself.
Right, because we would look at how many people have come to you with Section 8 and
right.
What is the reason why they were rejected? Was it because they had Section 8 or was it for other non-discriminatory reason?
Okay, thank you.
Here, Senator Holcroft.
Thank you, Chairman Wayne. I'm sorry, I missed the organization you represent.
Nebraska Equal Opportunity Commission, so we have jurisdiction over the Fair Housing Act.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you for being here. Next, neutral testifier.
Thank you, Chairman, members. My name is Randy Lenhoff, and I'm coming here to talk to you as in neutral position. I worked for Settling Company for about 40 years and CIP in Lincoln before that. And I retired in 2016. When I retired, I decided I wanted to work with a nonprofit. I got involved with St. Vincent de Paul Society in Omaha. And since then, we moved our facility down to 17th and Izard. We give out about 300 lunches a day to anyone who wants to get in line. So you get down around between 11 and noon. You'll see people in line getting their lunches. I'm a little surprised. I came here to talk about the fact that I deal with some people all over town, and what we do, the other thing we do is work to help prevent homelessness. We raise money, and we try to avoid that. And a couple of things that I heard said today bother me a little bit, because I can tell you that because I worked in housing so long, fair housing complaints do get investigated. They are not shared with the owner, and all the tenant has to prove is that they're a protected class. Then the owner has to prove that they didn't get discriminated against. So you got to understand that. And a lot of times it's used, then they're used as leverage because the owners don't get a copy report. That's in Nebraska law and that's in the federal law. So it puts the landlord at a disadvantage, and usually that's used to leverage a settlement with the owner, because there can be $50,000 in finding against them, as one guy said here, so usually you settle those. And I've been on both sides, or I've been on the other side of that because all my years with Selden, and so I've experienced. So I think if you're going to do this, I think you need to put some guardrails on it. And there needs to be a right for both parties to see the investigative report. That'd be number one. Then the other thing is put some limits on how much it'll be. The other thing I want to say before I forget is St. Vincent de Paul and the people I talk to are people that we call near homeless. So we've got people I've helped who you know, their rents, one lady I can think of, her rent was $900 a month, and she makes $1,100 a month on Social Security. So try and figure out how to live on that. I was able to find her in one of the Selden buildings that the gentleman was up here talking about, an affordable housing, and it was a Section 8 on that property. And so we were able to get her moved in there very quickly with the help of their people. And she calls me about every 6 months and thanks me again for helping her. And we helped a lot of people like that, the society does. We raise somewhere between $1 million and $1.5 million a year. We have 500 volunteers in Omaha, and all the money comes from private donations. So there's no federal help or anything, but I do think the city needs to, a couple of things that need to be brought up at this committee is the city needs to work on providing transportation for people who, if you want to get people spread out, get them other parts of town, you need to figure out a way to get them out there. Bus service is lousy.
The red light's on, so let me see if there's any questions.
And the city is also an
Sir, the red light's on.
Okay.
Hold on one second. We'll probably get to any other questions from the committee. So what else should the city be doing?
Well, they should allow TIF west of 680. They don't. I mean, I talked to a guy this year who went in and was going to do it affordable housing. And so if you want to get it spread out, you need to get it out there. And the city said, no, we don't do it west of 680. The other thing I'd ask somebody find out is if anybody's doing any for 202 this year. I mean, there's 202 housing money out there through the federal government. I helped do about 3 of those over the years. 2 of them were in West Omaha and was in north of downtown. But that money's out there, and HUD provides it. And somebody from the city has to help a nonprofit to get it. And you can get 100% of the cost. But you got to put an application in. It's a pretty difficult process. So you got to have some patience. So anyway.
Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you for being here.
All right, thank you.
Next neutral testifier. Seeing none, Senator Vargas comes up to close. We had 72 letters for the record, 35 in support and 35 in support and 37 in opposition. Senator Vargas.
Look, we're adding more people to the ledger on both sides in the last couple of years. Thank you very much, Chairman Wayne and members of the Judiciary Committee. I think we heard a lot of testimony, so I don't want to rehash this. There's just a couple of things I wanted to address. The first is, once again, we don't want to stop or impede any of the everyday reasons why somebody would not be able to rent. There are valid reasons that exist from their employment history, their credit history, rental history. They can still set the cost, how much security deposit is. This is all can be standardized. These are reasons why individuals cannot be rented to. What we're trying to do is utilize a solution that's been implemented in states all over the country. Since the last time we introduced this, I actually didn't have updated data. I said 10 states or 11 states and 50 cities. We're now closer to nearly 20 states and 100 cities that have source of income discrimination bans on the books. In those areas, landlords are still effective. The point of the matter is, I understand the concerns from individuals saying they don't like Section 8 housing or there's things that are onerous. That's something that we clearly have to improve on in the federal government. I also understand that it is difficult and onerous for people trying to get Section 8 housing vouchers to jump through those hoops. even to then have application fees and to spend years on a waiting list, to then have such a minimal amount of housing units available for them to be able to even apply and have 6 months to be able to get into a housing unit. The point of the matter is we need to make sure that we're removing barriers, and this is making sure that you cannot discriminate against somebody solely because of where your income is coming from. In this case, it would be a housing voucher. This doesn't discriminate against any other reason why the landlords would be able to say no to a tenant, and it's not forcing them, but we don't want to punish people for poor administration at the federal level. We want to make sure an existing program is working for individuals. We want to address homelessness, affordable housing, and stop the large number of low-income families that are on this from being able to then have safe housing. That's what this does. So happy to we can add more than 50,000. Doesn't matter to me how much we put into it, if it's going to pacify some of the concerns, but not doing something in this arena, which it is a simple change that can have a significant impact. I appreciate your support and help. Hopefully we can get this out of committee.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you for being here. That'll close the hearing on LB 248, and we will open the hearing on LB 175. Senator Johnson.
Oh, there is, I see him.